Welcome back, everyone. Hey, we've got a great treat this time. This is going to be about the Arctic Native Americans. And I'm not saying United States natives. These are Inuits. These are those that were before that, but all up in the Arctic. So you've got Alaska and you've got Canada. This is great. I love talking about these things. So let's get into this. Okay. So the first thing to know about the Arctic is, as everyone can understand, it is very cold. But here's something that's very interesting about the Arctic. It's not always the same effect. So I think I was talking to you about it yesterday. We were talking about the Paleo Indians. And when you're on the coastline, when you're in Juneau, when you're in Anchorage, when you're in anywhere on the coast of Alaska, it's cold and it's humid. So it might be 0 degrees, and someone that comes from the interior of Alaska will come out there. Now they're used to negative 40 degrees, and when they come out to the coast, they're freezing their butts off and they want to go right back home. That's right. So it's very interesting the difference between the two. So those that are in, like, say, Juneau or somewhere on the coast that is not as cold, they are actually getting they're not that cold. They're getting used to the fact that the humidity, much like when you have a heat and humidity, it penetrates the skin. It goes straight to the bone. It might be too hot or it might be too cold. But as you get used to it, you get used to it. As you start living in it, you get used to it. So here's an interesting thing. If you were a Native American, so they're called after the Paleo Indians. The next culture was called the Pre-Dorset Culture. These are basically anything before Dorset. Look at that. So obvious. But at least that's the names that they gave them. Pre-Dorset and Dorset. So Pre-Dorset, again, I'm looking at the curriculum as I'm going so you can get a little bit of this. Pre-Dorset is anywhere from 2000 BC to 500 BC. So we're getting closer to the Common Era. So beyond the zero. Now, Pre-Dorset, again, very primitive still in their tools, in their culture, all these different things. But this is where they all stayed along the coast, even if it was very humid. And so the cold penetrated their skin. And if you get closer to the North Pole on the coastline, so higher up in Alaska, it's going to get the negative 40 degrees. So you're getting both the negative 40 and the humidity. So it goes straight into your skin. So how do they overcome this? So what the Paleo Indians found out, and also probably the precursors, those that came before that, coming into the United States and even being in Siberia, the biggest thing that they did is they took hides of animals. So an animal can live in the deepest, darkest, coldest areas of the world, and yet they still survive. How is that? Well, they have two ways of survival. Well, possibly three, but main two. One is their fat content. It's the amount of fat that they have in their system. So you might look at yourself and say, oh, I need to get rid of this root beer belly. Or you might say, I need to lose weight. Well, in the Arctic, they actually use that to insulate their bodies, whether it's an animal or whether it was a human. So as an animal, they have this layer of fat. Now, you cannot wear animal fat. It just does not work. You can dry out the skin of it, but fat is digestible. It is eaten by things. You've got creatures and animals that will come in and eat nonstop that piece of clothing or whatever you made out of blubber from an animal. So most of the time, whether it's whale blubber, whether it's another animal's fat content, the Inuits or the Pre-Dorset and Dorset people ate that. They wanted as much fat inside them as possible. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but there is and I'm not trying to go on a tangent, but it will just show some of my reasonings for a lot of these things as I'm talking to you about this. Have you ever seen a program? It's on Hulu. It's called Alone. This is where someone secludes themselves for as long as possible. There's 10 different people all throughout a similar area who isolate themselves in different areas, like usually about 5, 6 miles away from each other, so that they can set up camp and try to survive. Now, most of these people, what they do, the first thing that they do, thinking, is that they, before they go into the program, they eat as much as possible. They try to pack on the weight. Why is that? Is because the more excess exercise, the more energy you exert, the more the fat will be used up, especially if you're not eating. So your body will literally eat all your fat first. Then, if you don't have any fat, it'll start eating your muscle. The biggest thing you want to keep it from doing is eating that muscle. So before they even go on the show, these people will eat as much as possible, get as fat as possible, get as much fat content as possible. And they go on these shows probably 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight from what they were before, because they're in preparation for, one, the cold temperatures, and two, being able to survive off the amount that they eat. Now, here's the thing. Here's very interesting. One thing that the people find out is that when they were eating in normal society, they were eating a lot of sugars and a lot of carbs. Well, sugars, of course, are going to pack on the fat because it basically converts itself into fat. It stores itself in your system. So the more sugar you eat, the more fat you will have. The second thing that happens is the carbs will do nearly the same thing. The carbs will turn into sugars, which will turn into fat. Well, when you're in this wilderness, there are no carbs. There are no sugars. It's all protein or vegetables. So if you are eating vegetables, so if you're a gatherer, you're getting fruits. So you do get a little bit of sugars, but they're all non-processed sugars, good sugars that you'll use up in your energy. And then the second thing you'll use is stuff that you're gathering, such as wheats, nuts, those types of things, grains. You're going to be gathering those. Those are carbs, but there's not much out there when it comes to these things. There's probably more berries in some places than there are carbs. And there's a lot more protein because that's what they hunted for. So when the pre-Dorset people came to be, around 2000 BC, they were hunting most of the time. Now, they were gatherers also. And interesting enough, you'll go into this curriculum and it'll have everything separated, but I'm going to bring it all together. One thing that to know, the hunters of the family were usually the men. The men would go out hunting, fishing as much as possible, while the women and the children would go out and gather because it was close to home. They were able to gather that up, get it all ready for when their husbands or fathers would come home with the protein. So gathering fruits, gathering some carbs, great, but it will not sustain you. You have to have protein. So you bring the protein in. You're not going to have that much carbs in the Arctic because you're gathering whatever you can. And what's up in the Arctic? You got too much snow. You do have some of a planting time, but the hunters and gatherers, they didn't plant farms. They gathered what they could find. The berries that are out there, the other plants that are out there, and they're going to gather as much as possible, as fast as possible, because the span of winter is much bigger than the span of summer, and you may have a spring, you may have a fall, but most likely you're just having a summer. So with that being known, you need to be able to gather as much as possible and also gather as much meat as possible. The great thing about protein is animals are always hunting, always working during the winter, most of them. Bears will hibernate. Some will go into a pre-hibernation slumber. That's not exactly hibernation because they'll go out and gather more food. Arctic rabbits or foxes. Those will be continually coming out of their holes and hunting during the winter. That's why their coats are white. Most of the time, they're actually not. They are out just as much during the winter that they are when the snow melts away. And so they have actually adapted to their environment, Arctic foxes, Arctic rabbits, because they're in a snowy area, they need to have white coats. So their body naturally evolved into this state. If they move away from it, they will start getting their dark skin. And we're not going to go into the science of it. You can look that up. It's a great study to go see how people or how animals adapt to the area. But the second way that they, besides the fat, in order to keep themselves warm, the humans keep themselves warm, or even the animals to keep themselves warm. The second one is putting on a layer of fur, uh, hair, all these different things, depending on what animal it is. Now, they put on this fur, the humans cut it off. Once they capture a caribou, a woolly mammoth, another type of mammoth, any kind of animal, they do two things. One, they take the meat, they eat the meat, they try to get as much out of that as possible because they can't go to the store and go buy more meat. They have to salvage everything on that animal as much as possible. Just again, going back to my Cherokee heritage, the Cherokees would spend a lot of time processing the meat. They gave thanks to the animal that gave their lives for them to eat. And they gave the praise to the animal because they gave up their lives so that the humans could survive. So when they killed an animal, they didn't try to let anything go to waste, whether it was the fur and wearing it or trading it, whether it was the meat, eating it, the fat, eating it, the intestines, hunting with it, or eating it, depending on which one it was, the bones, carving it, using it in their jewelry. That's right, every part of the animal they tried to use because they honored the animals that they had because they sustained the human, the Cherokee, or the Inuit, or again, we're talking about the Pre-Dorset and the Dorset people. But they didn't have the ability to go far out into the waters because they didn't create boats yet, or they didn't have these substantial boats. This is when that society, the Dorsets, became the Thule. So the Thule culture, so the Dorset people culture was about 500 BC. So again, after the Pre-Dorset, 500 BC to about 1500 AD. So these are mixed with the Inuits. These are basically where the Inuits would be part of. Inuits is basically a bigger statement of those that live in the Arctic, those indigenous people that live in the Arctic. But then you also have from the Dorset culture, you also have a breakoff of the Thule culture. Now, between the Dorsets and the Thules is when they started making boats and started launching out. The reason why this is significant is because by going further out in the water, they weren't just hunting seals on the shore or from the shore. They weren't going out a little bit in a makeshift vessel. They were going farther out into the water where they could get whales. Now, whales is essential to learn about the Arctic people. And the reason why this is because they went out and harvest, well, let's put it this way. They went out and harvest a Arctic fox. They'd feed probably one person, maybe two. They go out and harvest a whale. They feed a village. So everyone in their family and their village would be fed off of a whale. That's why the group went out. There was multiple boats that would go out and try to hunt a single whale or a set of whales. And they would go out there, they'd pull those whales back into shore, and they would harvest them on the shore as a community. So this was a community gathering. And I'll talk about the different roles that the communities have. But this is essential to understand because it's not just my family is going to take care of themselves and this family is going to take care of themselves. No, most of the time, if you're hunting, gathering, you're taking care of your families. If you go out for a whale, you bring it back, you have to be able to store that meat. During the winter, you can freeze it, you can chill it. But during the summer, you can't. So when you get a whale, you're going to try to, one, smoke it, which they did back then. And basically what that means is you cook it and season it, preserve it, so you can use it during the winter, even though it's the summer. But there's a lot of blubber in there. And an animal after a few days starts to turn. And if a family is going to take care of taking apart a whale, you're going to waste a lot of meat. It's going to die. The meat is going to die. It's going to turn, and it's not going to be edible. When you're in a community, you work together, bring in a whale, and you can all harvest it together. I'll give you an example. Okay, so another part of my heritage is actually being in Long Island. So my family was one of the first settlers coming from the Mayflower, coming down to New York. They actually settled the east end of Long Island. There's Montauk, there's Amagansett, there's the Hamptons. So all that area used to be my family and families of my family's community, my great 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 grandparents. Joshua Edwards was the last person to beach a whale north of New York. I don't know if there's any south of New York. I haven't done the research on that yet. But Joshua Edwards was my great 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 grandfather. So what 1900 basically. I think that was actually the year that 1900 or 1901 he hunted the last whale and brought it up onto shore. Well, when he brought it up onto shore, well, actually, go back further. When they saw whales off the coast of New York, off of the coast of Long Island, they had watchmen watching at all times. When they saw the spouts, they rang an alarm. The whole village came out. My father, or sorry, my great great grandfather, he would take, this is according to my dad, maybe he was just trying to teach me a lesson. He would take his wool gloves, he'd dip them in water so they were freezing, and when they froze, he'd then put his hands in them. Why is that? Because beyond the wool, the ice was a better shield of the cold than just wool. I couldn't do that. Holy, I'm cold downstairs in my office. But here's the thing. That is the best way, that was the best way for them to harvest a whale. The men went out, they grabbed the whale, harpooned it, dragged it into shore, and actually when they harpooned it, they hooked it up to lines, and the community would pull them in. They'd also do this similar thing with fishing, bringing out huge things of nets, not always with the community. That could be done with a family or two. But when they brought a whale back, they'd bring it into shore, and the whole community would go out there and harvest it. They all had a role to play. No one slacked. If you slacked, you didn't eat. And so they bring in these whales and they'd harvest them. They'd harvest the meat, the fat, the skin, the bones. Yes, even the whalers would harvest the bones. Why? Because they knew the value of the whales. They'd also harvest the oil. And again, whaling ships would go out and gather the oil and bring them back into the shore to sell it. These would do the same thing, but they'd get it offshore. They'd bring the whale back and they'd sell it. Or they'd use it for their lanterns because, again, whale blubber, whale fat, whale oil is flammable after being processed. So they would use that oil and fill their lanterns. And then they'd have light in their homes. They'd use the blubber and the meat to eat. They would use the skin for certain things. They would use the bones for art and other things. Now the Inuit people, let's go back. Let's go back to the Dorsets. Or sorry, not to the Dorsets, to the Thule people. Again, this is 1000 BC to present day. Now, rules are different. They can't go hunting for whales as easily. Now, recently, 30 years, 40 years ago, they outlawed all whale hunting. All whale hunting. We destroyed the culture of all those living in the Arctic that would go hunting for whales. They did it as a rite of passage, as a part of their culture. The US government outlawed all whale hunting for a time. Only recently did we allow them to come back, and this is about 30 years ago that we allowed them to come back. So it's probably like 60 years ago that we outlawed whale hunting. I gotta double check that. Don't quote me on that. But then they brought back for the Inuit people. And the reason why they did that is because it was such part of their culture. We were destroying their culture. But let's go back to the early Thule people. What would they do? They made these boats. So they would take, interesting enough, they would take seal hide or even whale skin and they would wrap their boats in it because it's waterproof. They'd be able to float out and harvest a whale. They'd bring that back. They'd gather the meat. They would smoke it. They would eat it. Fat, meat, bring it all in. Then they would take the bones. They use the intestines for eating or to hunt with bait, basically. Then they'd use the bones. Here's an interesting thing. Okay, so I haven't brought up any of my pictures, and I've probably gone a little bit further than I was planning to at this point. Okay, so this is the Arctic. We have the Bering Straits right here. Bering Sea, Chukchi Sea. This is the Arctic Ocean, North Pole and such. So you have the people that broke off. The Dorset people were the people that stayed on the northern coasts. Yes, actually down here too. It does not show up, but it is actually true. So these were the Dorset people, or so the pre-Dorset people. You have other tribes that will go lower, and we'll go over that tomorrow when we talk about the Northwest Coast culture. Okay, so the Dorset people would move over to these areas, the better hunting grounds. Again, up here is great, but in here, there's a little bit more breaking from the Arctic, because over here, it would completely freeze 100% during the winter. Down in here, it'd be less icing, but it's still ice over, most of it. Okay, so during the summer, you'd go out and you'd hunt for whales up here in the Arctic Ocean. Now, when you bring back a whale, you would use their skins and such and everything. This is actually a picture of someone that was Dorset. So, again, not much different. This is an Inuit from probably northern Alaska and even Canada. Not much different than what you see these days. And you have to know, these are some of the nicest people you ever met. They don't have the issues of social media or keeping up with the Joneses. They kept up with the neighbor who has basically the same thing that they have because they're all hunters and gatherers. They were community oriented, which was great. But they also their first concern was their families and keeping their families fed. Okay, so some of the Dorset people. I've actually got a great website. I'll put in the links. This is the Arctic peoples it talks about and the history of the Arctic people. It's a good read. It has some great pictures too. They were all into the arts. Again, Dorsets, pre-Dorsets and Dorsets. These are some of the masks that they would have made. And actually, these are actually masks that they would have made, still preserved to this time, which is amazing because wood doesn't usually last that long. Up in the Arctic, it actually does, depending on where it's found. But as long as it's kept dry and insects don't get to it, it actually keeps fairly well. So these are the boats I was talking about. They would wrap the hides around the boat so that you could launch into the ocean, and it's completely 100% waterproof, which would allow them to go out further into the ocean to find whales and other things. They would still hunt seals. They'd still hunt other animals that were in the ocean, but mostly that, because they can fish from land. They can fish from close offshore, but they couldn't get whales. So these boats were essential to use. But this is what I wanted to show you. So this is a picture of late Dorset people. So not going to show, you can't really zoom much into their faces, but as you can see, there are whalebone that made up the structure of their home. This was essential because during the winter, the winds up there, 50, 60, 100 miles an hour. You have a hurricane down south, just as bad as the winds up north. For one thing, at least down south, you have wind breakage, you have trees, you have buildings that break up some of the wind. In the Arctic, there is nothing. There is nothing stopping that wind. It just keeps getting faster and faster and faster as it goes. So they've used the whalebone to keep their structures safe, to keep them up, to keep them secure. Now, they didn't just have whale bones and hides. They actually used sod. So sod is basically dirt and grass and moss from the ground and place it in there. Now, one thing you'll read in the curriculum is they actually went subterranean. So you might see that this place is up above, but they would actually dig down. A lot of times, if you put a new place, a new structure on top of the colder areas, you won't be able to dig down because it's so cold. That is called permafrost. It's 100% frozen throughout the year, or at least mostly frozen throughout the whole year. Permafrost. Soils, dirts, organic material, completely frozen. Now, as soon as they put the structure up and start warming it, what happens to the permafrost underneath? It starts getting soft. But what happens when it starts getting soft? Some of it starts to sink. Yeah, this is organic material. It's not dirt. It's not hard packed dirt. So some of these people were placing their structures on top of this area, and when they were lighting it on fire, lighting a fire inside, again, they'd have it in the middle, and they'd have a vent at the top of their structure of their home. Now, once they start getting soft, they actually have to dig it out. They'd use it for their insulation inside. They'd also make mounds outside to get rid of that permafrost that was organic material until they get to a hard substance. But what does that do? When you go lower into the earth, you're actually going to get the heat of the earth. You have a permafrost layer. The permafrost layer is all frozen. Underneath, it's actually warm. So the further down you go, depending on the sea level. So say you're close to the ocean and the sea level's down here and your structure's up here. The further you drop down, the closer you're going to get to the water levels, and then the water will start seeping into your home. So they have to always keep that in mind. So they couldn't go too far down. That's why it's called subterranean. If it was terranean, it'd be under the ground, or near subterranean. So subterranean is basically under the ground. Sub being under, terranean being ground. These were near subterranean because they couldn't go underground. They couldn't build a basement. It's like building a basement in New Orleans. You can't do it because the water levels are so high. You're right on the sea level or even below the sea level, which means the water levels are right there and you'd flood your basement every day. Every day. So it doesn't work. So these people of the Arctic culture would live this way. So very hard for them. Very intense at times. So you're not just hunting animals. Up in the Arctic, they're hunting you. Whether it comes to wolves, they'll hunt you. But they'll try to keep their distance. They'd rather be away from a human unless they are starving. But you also have bear. Now, you do have brown bear in some places, depending on where the Dorset people were, or the Thule people were. But even more dangerous were the polar bears. So I love it. It's hilarious when you watch Coca-Cola with their mascot polar bear giving a human a hug. Yeah, you know what he's doing if he's giving you a hug? He's killing you, he's gutting you, and he's going to eat you. That's right. Polar bears are not cute and cuddly. They are mean, vicious animals, and they are the only animal that will actually hunt human intentionally in preparation to go into a pre-hibernation stage or hibernation stage. They will hunt human because all they are to a polar bear is food. So today, if you go up to the northern area, now I've only gone as far as Nome or Fairbanks, but in Nome, if a polar bear is spotted, there's an alarm that goes out. Say, I'm in Missouri now. We have a tornado warning. Alarms go off if there's a tornado in the area or might be in the area. In Alaska, in Canada, if a polar bear is in the area, the alarms go off. The alarms go off, and at that point, you are not allowed to keep a human out of your structure, out of your home. If there is a polar bear in the area, it will kill that human, and so everyone has to allow the humans into their structure, into their home, into whatever building it is, to take sanctuary until that polar bear passes. And you are constantly watching that polar bear until it leaves. Because for one thing, that uninvited guest, you want out of your house. You don't know who this person is. I mean, you might if he's part of the community. If he's not, you still can't let him stay out there where the polar bear is. It's inhumane and it's against the law in like every area I know of. Maybe there's some that are not, but that would be inhumane because the polar bear will hunt that person and eat them. Literally. There's a great video on YouTube, and it shows a person in basically a dome of some sort, a very reinforced glass. and you can actually see the polar bear walking around and attacking the glass, trying to get to that human. Again, to the polar bear, that's food. It doesn't matter if it's a human, it's a seal. Does not matter, it's food. In the Arctic, food is hard to come by. So why the Thule people stayed up in that area, I'm not quite sure. Which is why some of them went down south along the coast as well. Again, most of them feeding off of the things that they get from the ocean. So those that came to the northwest coast, the culture, we'll talk about tomorrow, and we'll talk about what they did. This is really interesting because I'm actually from the area where they're at. We're the northern coast people, and I've studied them a lot, especially in school, because I went to high school in Alaska. Again, my dad's Coast Guard, so we were all over the coast. California, Connecticut. And now, because of that, I'm able to have a large range of understanding of these people. So the northern coast people, can't wait to tell you a little bit more about that. So let's go into just a few more things. What was happening during this time? And we're going to go through this fast, but you're going to read more about this. What was happening during the Pre-Dorset, the Dorset, and the Thule people? Again, that's a long span. That's 2000 BC to 1500 BC. So sorry, it's a big span. Let's go over a few things that were happening near the beginning. Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt were becoming big at that point. They were becoming established civilizations. So you have the construction of the Great Pyramids was happening around 2500 BC. You have the Code of Hammurabi was written for Mesopotamia in about 3000 BC. I'm not exact. No, sorry, it was 1754 BC. You also have different things happening in China. At this point, between 2070 and 1600 BC, you have the first dynasties. So you have the Xi, Xi dynasty, which is the first traditionally known dynasty in China. But you also have the Shang dynasty, which is 1600 to 1000 BC. And the Shang dynasty is the ones that created the Chinese writing. So very important times. You also have the classic antiquities era. So it's about 500 BC to 1500 AD, the time of the Pre-Dorset and the Thules. This was the Greek and Persian wars that were happening. Alexander the Great, huge. This is the start of the Roman Empire. About the, 27 BC, a little bit earlier than that, but 27 BC. You have the Maya civilization, 2000 BC. So they were establishing when the people were just starting to funnel down. The Maya has started growing there. And you've got a whole lot more. Some other things to know. As I said, we're going to talk about the origins of these people and go a little bit more into each of them and where they came from, how they survived, where they went. Then we also have the important figures. And again, at this point, we don't have John and Jane and whoever in these. There's no writing. So we can't actually tell who was there, actual individuals. But we can tell is there were shamans, there were tool makers, there were community leaders. And this is where I was going to talk to you about the roles of the families, which I basically went over. The women were in charge of gathering and gathering goods, gathering resources, food, and bringing it back to the home and preparing it. The husbands were sent out to do the hunting, the fishing, the whaling, whatever they could do. So these are the different separations of their culture. You're going to read a lot more about this in the curriculum. It's a great read. It really is. The next thing you have is archaeological evidence of these. So you have caves in these areas that have the tools still preserved. You have the drawings, the glyphs on the walls that you'll see. So we have a lot of different key sites in this. You also have, and this is really cool. Okay, so I showed you this picture. The next one is some of the things that are still standing from the Dorsets and the Thules. Sorry, the Thules. They were the first ones to really know about whaling and using the whale bones. These are all whale bones, and look how preserved they are. They don't go away. Wood rots. Wood bone doesn't. You might have creatures that will eat it, but it's a whale bone. I mean, you're not going to get a wolf that can get a mouth around that thing. Whew. No, not at all. This is also something interesting. And so you're going to go through a bunch of the things in this curriculum. Actually, before I get to this, let's stay here. So what are some of the things that we went through? This is the vocabulary list that's in here. We went through the Pre-Dorset, the Dorset, the Thules, all of them making up the Inuits, which the definition in the book is indigenous people inhabiting the Arctic region, Greenland, Canada, Alaska, descendants of the Thule culture. Interesting enough, the Thule culture is actually part what we would consider Inuit because they're still somewhat alive. I mean, because the Thule are broken up into tribes, which is whatever all the cultures do. They break into tribes, but they're still active. Thules are still active in the world today. And so Inuit is all of the Thules and all the people that stay up in the Arctic, the indigenous people. Semi-subterranean. Sorry, it wasn't near. Semi-subterranean. Semi-subterranean is, again, where you build your home and then you dig down into the earth trying to get the warmth from the earth, not going too far, which is why it's semi-subterranean, because you're going to get the water levels and the water starting to come into your home, and you don't want that. Umiaks, that is this. An umiak is a large open boat used by the Thules and Inuit to transport and hunt, typically made of seal, walrus, and skin. Walrus skin. So seal and walrus skin stretched on wooden frame. There you go. That is a umiak. You also have kayaks, which are individual boats, which usually one person or two people sit in. So a little bit different, not open. It's closed so that it keeps your legs and everything dry and hopefully warm. Now, you're going to go through a bunch of other things. Harpoons are basically how they harvested whales. They throw harpoons, which are big spears. Sod, we went over that. Ivory carving, the ivory tusks from animals, and also the bones from whales. They would do carvings. And then the Bering Land Bridge, we talked about the last time. So there's a few more. Permafrost, there's other things. Read about them. This is a great list to understand those people. But here's the great thing. So, okay, I brought up this picture. What in the world is this? You can't see much out of that. Actually, you can. These are, and I wish I could actually, I can't, for some reason, can't zoom in. These are Arctic glasses. These are snow glasses. So we might have goggles when we go skiing, but here they have snow glasses. These were the first snow goggles. These were the first crafts that they made in order to see so they wouldn't get snowblind. The reason is because the sun comes in one direction. When you have a slit like that, you get to see a lot of information that's coming around, but you don't get snow blindness. The snow can't get in there, so you keep your eyes protected. And the sun actually doesn't come in a way that it will blind you as well. When it shines right off the snow, I've been blinded by snow. It is painful. Your eyes hurt for like hours, minutes or hours. So these would help them from doing it. And as you can see, there's small slits. The reason why I bring this up is because your first activity is actually to create one of these and see how much you can see out of them. But also, most of these activities, sorry to say, are winter activities, are more winter-esque. Because the next one's actually quite fun too. It's creating an igloo, but out of marshmallows. And if you like hot chocolate, marshmallows are a great way of going. So you can create this miniature igloo, and then you can douse some of those marshmallows in a thing of hot chocolate. But there's also ones that are not meant for winter, which are like animal research, traditional Inuit games. So we actually give you a game. It's called the blanket toss. We'll see if you can actually do it. There's also the buckle hop, which you might be able to do. And then there's storytelling or oral history. You ever played telephone before? Where you tell one person, they try to tell the next person? That's the thing that happens with these oral histories that are spread. So things change. But play this activity. You might enjoy it. Okay. Other than that, that's all I got for you today. So tomorrow is also going to be fun because we're going to be talking about the... oh, sorry. I was wrong. You know what? I'm going to skip. I'm going to change. We're going to do the northwestern coast because it goes so well with what we're already talking about. And then we go to the Adena and Hopewell culture. So tomorrow we'll do the West Coast and then Northwest Coast, and then we will come back to the Adena. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me on this great Adventure Box podcast day. We will catch you next time. Take care and have a great day. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow actually. Take care. Bye.